the International Soccer Preview. We are Soccer Files Canada. Welcome to Series 20, the 2023 African Cup. This episode is looking at the players of Senegal. Here we go. Hello and welcome to the International Soccer Preview by Soccer Files Canada. I'm Kevin, and this is a continuation of Series 20 on the 2023 African Cup, played in 2024. We have done a full and short version on the groups and teams, and now we're looking at the players of each team, this episode covering Senegal's players. We're doing this mediacast in two parts. Part one here is a look at the candidates for the squad and their likelihood of making it. And part two will come out when the squad lists are released and the final squad selected. We think that'll be in early January. And at that time, we will go back over the list we compiled today and see who made it and who didn't. We'll also cover a few other things that I'll talk about at the end of the mediacast. We did do a mediacast on the players of Senegal going into the 2021 African Cup, that taking place in January 2022, but even more recently going into the World Cup in December of 2022. So check the show notes for those. Well, I think we just posted the World Cup one because that's the most recent, and that provides biographies on the candidates in quite a bit of detail. Since a lot of that is still relevant, we've decided not to commit ourselves to full player mediacasts every 2 years for the African region. So we're going to be treating this one as more of an update. In that series, we were able to show who made it and who didn't make the final squad, but we could only go as far as predicting the starters. So here we'll begin with the list we compiled for the World Cup. We'll review who made the squad in 2022 and then update by saying who the starters were. Then we'll turn our attention to 2023 and update the players based on their participation over the past 2 years. So we will emerge with a new list of players and their likelihood of making the squad for the upcoming African Cup. We're also going to put a few players in the spotlight. These will be players who were not covered in the mediacast for the previous cup and those who have a good chance of starting. So any main players that we don't put in the spotlight were covered in the mediacast for the 2022 World Cup. And that'll be most of the players. And the information in the previous mediacast is not too outdated. So again, we refer you to the link in the show notes. And for fun, we're going to finish with our early predictions of starters, and we'll also let you know what to expect in part two. We have made a separate video on what we'll be covering over the next 9 months. YouTube watchers can see the link to that on the screen here, and it can also be found in the show notes for both watchers and listeners. In short, we have just completed our series on the groups, teams, and players, or part one of the players, for the 2023 Asian Cup, and we've also done the groups and teams for the upcoming African Cup, and as you can see, we're working on the players, part one of the Players podcast for the African teams. And we've also started coverage of 2026 World Cup qualifying. We did some coverage of the Asian preliminary rounds, but that'll be our focus once these two competitions are finished in February 2024. All right, let us begin then. So we move into section 2, our look at the candidates for the squad. And we begin with the manager. And we're going to start with the situation back in the World Cup. And we had Aliou Cissé as the manager. Well, that hasn't changed, and he continues to be manager of the team. And so we will leave him in green on the assumption that he is effectively the starting player in the position, or he will continue, he will keep his job going into this cup. So again, we did do a previous podcast on a biography for him, but in this update, we're going to skip that, but you can go back if you want and look at it. or listen to it. Okay, we move on to the goalkeepers and look back at what we thought for the World Cup in 2022. So we had Edward Mendy as a definite candidate there, and we had three possible candidates: Seny Dieng, uh, yes, possible level, Seny Dieng, Alfred Gomez, and Bingaru Kamara. And then we had one possible but unlikely candidate in Alium Badara Fati. And let's see how it turned out. Edward Mendy was selected for the squad and was a starting keeper, in fact. Since then, he's started 8 of their senior team games. And I'll just pause there to talk about that for the senior team games. Senegal did play some games in the African Nations Championship, but only players who are based in Africa are eligible to play in that tournament. So since most of the starters for the senior team that they bring to tournaments are playing abroad, we decided to leave those games kind of out of the count. So they actually played more than 13 games, but we're just counting 13 games. So Edward Mendy started 8 of them, but was not selected for 5 matches there. And so going forward, we're going to bring him down to the likely level. So he moves from definite to likely. However, we do kind of think he'll still be the starter. We'll talk about that in the summary at the end. Next, the first possible candidate, Seny Dieng, was selected for the Cup, but he was on the bench there in the World Cup. And he has since started one of their 13 senior games. But has been on the bench for 11 of them. So just one match that Seny Dieng was not selected for. So even though we don't consider him the starter, we move him up to definite, because definite means we definitely think he'll be selected for the final squad, not necessarily as the starter. So Seny Dieng moves up the rank a little bit. Alfred Gomez was the other, or the next possible candidate, and he also was selected for the squad, but on the bench behind Mendy there. He has since started 2 of their 13 senior games since the World Cup, and was on the bench for 6 of them. However, Alfred Gomez was not selected for the last 5 matches there. So we leave him at the possible level here. Just to follow up on Bingaru Kamara, he was not selected for the squad and has not appeared for the squad since. So we remove him from the list. And also Alium Badara Fati, we thought he was unlikely, and he was selected for the 2021 African Cup, but not for the World Cup, and has not played for the senior team since. So we remove him from the list as well. However, we do add one player to the list, and that is at the likely level. We add Maury Diaw. Maury Diaw got his first cap in September of 2022, so before the World Cup there, and he started one of their 13 games since the World Cup, and was on the bench for 7 and not selected for 5. However, 4 of those matches were the World Cup that he wasn't selected for, and so he has been regularly called up since, actually replacing Alfred Gomez there for those last 5 games. So Maury Diaw, a likely candidate now. We're not going to do a full biography on him because he doesn't seem like a starter to us, and we'll finish this section. No, I'm going to add a couple of names to the list at the possible but unlikely level, and the first one is Pape Sai. Pape Sai was the keeper in the African Nations Championship, but he did actually start one game for the senior team, but hasn't appeared otherwise. We also have Abdoulaye Diakate, possible but unlikely, and he had just one bench appearance fairly recently in September 2023, but he wasn't called up after that. So an outside chance for both of those to make the squad. But let's finish by summarizing and then talking about the position. So we have a definite candidate in Seny Dieng, although we don't consider him a starter. We have likely candidates Edward Mendy and Maury Diaw. And we have possible candidate Alfred Gomez, and then a couple of possible but unlikely players. So in terms of the position, we saw that it was Edward Mendy who was the starter in the World Cup. However, he was absent for 5 games, and during that absence, almost all of the goalkeepers were given a start. But Mendy did return at the end and still seems to be the starter. So we are going to nominate Edward Mendy as the starting keeper. That's our prediction. Okay, let us move on to defenders and central defenders. And let's see what we had going into the World Cup there. So we had Kalidou Koulibaly as a definite candidate, and Abdou Diallo also a definite candidate. Likely was Pape Abou Cissé, and we had Abdoulaye Seck as a possible candidate, and we will leave it at that for now. We did have a couple who seemed to be off the squad or retired, but we're not going to mention them unless they figure in the narrative here. So going back to the top, Kalidou Koulibaly was selected for the Cup. He was the captain and started and finished all games there. And since then, Koulibaly has started 11 of their 13 games on the bench for 1 and not selected for 1. So we still consider him a definite candidate here. Next, we have Abdou Diallo. We considered him definite, and he was selected and started all 4 games in the Cup. Since then, Diallo has started 6 of the 13 senior games, and he was subbed in for 2, on the bench for 2, injured for 2, and not selected for 1. So he seems to have lost his starting position because 4 of those 6 games were actually in the World Cup. So he's really only started 2 since then. Nevertheless, we still can. We move him actually down from a definite to a likely candidate for being selected for this Cup. I should say also that he played as a left defender in the first game of the World Cup there, but his participation, as we saw, has dropped off in terms of being a starter there. Next, we had Pape Abou Cissé as a likely candidate, and he has dropped off the team. He has not appeared since the World Cup. He was selected, I should say. He actually started and finished game 1, and then lost his starting position and just appeared as a substitute after that. But he hasn't been called up since the World Cup, and so we now have Pape Abou Cissé as seemingly off the squad. Okay, next, our possible candidate was Abdoulaye Seck, and he was not selected for the World Cup. I think, no, we weren't surprised by that. We only considered him possible. Actually was off the Senegal squad for a little while, but returned after a 9-month absence in March of 2023 and started 3 of their remaining 9 games and was on the bench for 5 and not selected for 1. So it looks like he kind of dropped off the squad during the World Cup period, but is now back. And so we actually had Abdoulaye Seck as a possible candidate for the World Cup. We move him up to a likely candidate for this Cup. When the rosters came out, we actually added a new candidate. I should have mentioned it as we were introducing them. Foremost Mendy had been added to the squad, and he was selected for the squad, so we'll change his name from grey, which indicates that a player hasn't been through a tournament, to black, which indicates that they have. So Foremost Mendy was selected for the World Cup, but he was on the bench for all 4 games there. Since then, he started one of their 13 games, subbed in for 2, and on the bench for 7. So just 2 matches that he was not selected for. So even though he doesn't get on the field much, we do consider him a likely candidate for being selected to the squad. His only start was actually as a right back. There, so a little difficult to work his way into the central defense, but he has been on the bench. So there we have it. We've covered then all the candidates for the 2022 World Cup, but we have a couple of new ones to add. And the first one is at the likely level, so we'll do a spotlight on him. It is Moussa Diakate. Sorry, what am I talking about? Moussa Niakate. Moussa Niakate. So let's spotlight him right now. He's been with the team since 2023, as we will see, and he has 7 caps and is 27 years old. He plays for Nottingham Forest in England and was with Mainz in Germany and Metz in France prior to that. He was actually born in France there and played for the French under-19 to under-21 teams. So he got his first appearance actually before the World Cup on the bench in September 2022, but he was out with a hamstring injury and for 6 months. So he returned to the squad in March 2023 to start 6 of their remaining 9 games. Subbed in for 1, on the bench for 1, and not selected for 1. So not only appearing for the squad, but actually starting 6 games for them. Moussa Niakate added to our list as a likely candidate. And we also have one to add at the possible level, and that's Abdoulaye Ndiaye. And we won't detail him because we don't see him as a possible starter, but he did get his first appearance in September 2023 and didn't start any of their remaining 4 games, but was on the bench for 3 of them. So we think he's a possibility to call up. We'll add a couple of names at the possible but unlikely level. And first one is Cheikhou Ndiaye and Ousmane Diouf. Both of these players were carried forward from the African Nations Championship squad, so they're, or they were at the time, African-based, and but just brought up for the friendly in March and have not appeared since. So a very outside chance of them making the squad. Okay, so let's summarize first by going through the candidates. So we now have Koulibaly as a definite candidate, 4 likely candidates in Diallo, Seck, Mendy, and Niakate, and a possible candidate in Abdoulaye Ndiaye. And yeah, we won't mention the other ones. Let's talk about how things have looked in central defence. So it was Koulibaly starting all 4 games in the Cup, alongside Cisse in the first game and Diallo in the next 3 games there. And basically since then it's been a mix of the players. Koulibaly has been steady, so it's usually Koulibaly and someone else alongside him. Various players actually. Abdoulaye Seck got a couple of starts. Diallo coming back into it. But towards the end, it was Niakate. So if I have to choose among our 4 likely candidates, I almost think that newcomer Moussa Niakate is going to get the nod. Nevertheless, we will highlight Kalidou Koulibaly as a starter, and I'm not bold enough to predict who's going to be alongside of him. Okay, and I'm just going to take a moment to fix up the graphics here because I put the central defenders in the wrong place. And there we go, we got it. Okay, so we move on to the left backs and we begin with the predictions we had for the 2022 World Cup. So we had Saliou Cisse as a definite candidate back then, and we had Fode Ballo-Touré as a possible candidate. And yes, I will introduce the newcomer. So when the squads came out, we found Ismail Jacobs on the list, added as a new candidate, someone who hadn't come onto our radar enough to mention in part one of the podcast there. So those are the three candidates. Let's see what became of them. To our surprise, Saliou Cisse was not selected for the final squad, and since he has not appeared for the team, no, he has appeared for the team. No, it's the World Cup. Sorry, I'm getting mixed up between the 2021 African Cup and the 2022 World Cup. He last appeared for the national team in June of 2022. So I'm not actually sure. Maybe it was a mistake for us to predict him as a definite candidate. Anyway, he is off the list here. In terms of the 2023 Cup. Next, let's look at our possible candidate back then, Fode Ballo-Touré. He was selected for the squad. He didn't play much. He appeared only briefly in Game 4, where he was subbed in at the 84th minute, and he didn't even appear on the bench in Game 2 there. Since then, the World Cup, Ballo-Touré has started none of their 13 games, but he was subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 6. And that includes the last 3 matches there. So Ballo-Touré remains a possible candidate for this cup. Next, we have Ismail Jacobs, and we now turn his name to black because he was selected for the squad. He was subbed into Game 1, 62 minutes in, and then gained a starting position for the following 3 games. So has really inserted himself quickly into the squad. And I do believe we did the biography for him in part 2 of the 2022 World Cup mediacast, because when we saw that he was added to the squad. So since the World Cup, the German-born Jacobs has started 8 of their 13 games, subbed in for 2. He was injured for 2 and not selected for 2. That adds up to 14, so there's a small mistake in there somewhere, but you get the general idea. He started more than half of the games and has been around. So we now move Jacob for this tournament up from a new candidate to a likely candidate, and in fact he seems probably the best candidate for a starter, but we'll get to that soon. Let's now look at a couple of new players that have come into the picture recently. So we have Abdallah Ndour. Abdallah Ndour we put as a possible candidate, so below Fode Ballo-Touré there. And Abdallah Ndour actually appeared for the national team way back in 2016, and he appeared also twice in 2021. Those were all bench appearances. Now he's returned after a 2-year absence in March to start one of their remaining 9 games. And he was on the bench for 4, injured actually for the last 2, so a bit of an injury doubt, and not selected for 1. So he looks like a reasonably decent candidate for making the squad, but the injury may play into it there. We have Abdallah Ndour as a possible candidate here. And finally, we have Cheick Sidibe as a possible but unlikely candidate. And he is one of the African Nations Championship players. He's based in Tanzania in Africa. So he's eligible for that tournament, but he was selected 3 times for the senior team after that appearance. However, he has not appeared for the last 4 matches, so we consider him unlikely. Okay, let's then take a summary and a look at the position. So we have likely candidate Jacobs, possible candidates Ballo-Touré and Ndour, and we'll leave it at that. It was actually the central defender, Diallo, I mentioned, playing as the left back in game 1 of the World Cup, and then Jacobs came in and played the last 3 games in the Cup. However, he didn't really retain the position. It was kind of a different player every game for a little while after the World Cup, including Endur here. But otherwise, it was mostly out of position players. Fodo Ballo-Touré didn't get a start. However, towards the end of the period, they did come back to Ismail Jacobs, and all in all, he started 8 of their 13 games there. So we do consider Ismail Jacobs the likely candidate, with the starter for this position. And so we'll highlight him in green there on the graphic. Okay, that is the left back situation, and we move on to right backs and begin with the candidates that we had for the previous World Cup. So no definite candidates, but we had a likely candidate in Bouna Sarr and in Youssouf Sabaly. We also had Ibrahima Mbaye as a possible candidate, and we had 3 players who seem to be off the squad, and I'm not going to mention them because none of them kind of factor in into the narrative here. So we go back and look at how things turned out for these candidates, and we begin with Bouna Sarr. And I actually question why we had him as a likely candidate. He has a bit of an odd history with the team. He got his start in October of 2021, and then he started all of their games up until March of 2022, and then didn't appear for the national team since. So I'm not sure why we had him as a likely candidate for the World Cup. Perhaps it was that he plays with Bayern Munich, so a very good club affiliation and resume at the club level. And was a starter in the 2021 African Cup, but he still has not returned since March of 2022. I have a note here, he was out of contention due to a knee injury, so perhaps that's why he hadn't played since March, and we thought he might come back, but he never hasn't appeared in this period either. So we have to consider Bouna Sarr seemingly off the squad at this point, even though he's just 31 years old and still playing club soccer. Okay, next we have Youssouf Sabaly, and Youssouf Sabaly did make the squad for the final squad and for the World Cup, and he was the starter, starting and finishing all 4 games there. And he has since started 8 of their 13 games, on the bench for 1. However, he was out with a muscle injury for the last 3 matches. So Youssouf Sabaly, an injury concern, but we're kind of leaving those things unless it's a really long-term injury, which I don't have an indication that this is. We're going to leave that for part 2 when we get a bit closer to the Cup and we can give more reliable information on injuries. But definitely a concern at this point. The possible candidate, Ibrahima Mbaye, and I got to say, looking back, I'm not sure why we had him as a possible candidate. He was a starter in the 2021 African Cup, but actually hadn't appeared for the team since that African Cup up until the 2022 World Cup. So it doesn't seem sensible for us to have put him as a possible candidate. Anyway, he has not played for the team since the African Cup there in January 2022. So we remove him altogether from the list here. And we add players that are new to the squad since. So we have 2 at the possible level, and that is Noah Fadiga. And Noah Fadiga got his first appearance on the bench in March 2023. Didn't start any of their games, but was on the bench for 4 of the 9 matches there. So a possible candidate in Noah Fadiga. He is Belgian born. Also, a possible candidate in Mamadou Sane. Also, no caps for the African team. Sorry, for the Senegal team. But he was a starter in the African Nations Championship and got an appearance with the senior team with a start in September 2023 and a further appearance on the bench in October of 2023. So a possible candidate there. And I think that is it. So let's go back and review the right back position. So it was Yusuf Sabali in the World Cup, starting all 4 games and a couple of games afterwards. A bit of experimentation in the middle of the period in 2023 until they did come back to Sabali. However, we saw that he got injured at the end. And filling in has mostly been right midfielder Crepin Diatta, who we will meet shortly. Okay, so that's the situation for right backs. Before we move on to the midfield, though, I'm going to redress something that I should have been doing, which is I meant to mention significant club changes for the players. So we're going to just kind of go back and talk about a couple of players. First of all, goalkeeper Edward Mendy was with Chelsea in England, but has now moved to Al Ahly in Saudi Arabia. And also teammate Kalidou Koulibaly, the central defender, also moving from Chelsea to Saudi Arabia, and he is with Al Hilal in Saudi Arabia now. Abdou Diallo, the other definite central defender, actually likely central defender, Abdou Diallo, has moved from Paris Saint-Germain in France to Al Arabi in Qatar. So all of these are kind of steps down, I must say. And let's see if we have any more. Yes, the left back, Saliou Cisse, who is now off the squad, and it kind of reflects in his club situation too. He was with Nancy in France up until 2022, but is unattached to a club, so that seems like it's been for quite a while now, so no surprise that he's not really a candidate for this cup. And I believe that's it, so we can move on to the midfield. And we'll begin with defensive midfielders and look back at the situation in 2022. We had Nampalys Mendy as a definite candidate and Papa Gueye as a likely candidate. A possible candidate in Mamadou Loum Ndiaye. And we had a possible but unlikely candidate who I won't mention because he doesn't come back into the picture. But we also had a new candidate there added to the roster at the end, Pathé Ciss, a new candidate. So let's see how things developed for these players. Nampalys Mendy was a starter in the cup for 3 of the games at least. He subbed into 1 of the 4 games. And he since has started 6 of the 13 games since the World Cup, subbed in for 3 and not selected for 2, but injured for the last 2. So he is out with a hamstring injury. But one of the sources I use say that he is due back on January 8th. That would be cutting it close because the cup begins on January 12th. So he will be an injury concern going into the cup, and perhaps we can update it in part 2 of the podcast. And Nampalys Mendy has also undergone a club change after 7 years with Leicester in England. He has now moved to Lens in France. Leicester being relegated from the English Premier League there. So Nampalys Mendy, we would move him here from definite down to likely with the asterisk of an injury concern for him. Papa Gay was selected for the squad. He was just a sub, though, subbed into games 1 and 4 there, and has since started 5 of their 13 games. Not selected for 2 and suspended for the last 5 matches. He's under a 4-month suspension, which should end before the Cup. But there again will be a bit of an asterisk here, a concern of whether he will be fit, whether he will have the fitness to play in the Cup. So Papa Gay, we move down to from likely to a possible candidate here. And we'll have to see again. Maybe we'll get a bit more information on it closer to the Cup. Our possible candidate, Mamadou Loum Ndiaye, is now off the squad. He has not appeared. He was selected for the World Cup. He was on the roster there, but saw no action in the Cup, just on the bench there, but has not been selected since the World Cup. So we are removing him from the list, or yes, we'll put him as seemingly off the squad there. Since he was selected in 2022, we think there's a slight chance of him coming back. And that is, oh no, Pathé Cisse. Actually, I made a mistake introducing him as a defensive midfielder. He's actually coded as a central midfielder. So we'll just move him there and talk about him in the next section, because we're not going to summarize defensive midfielders until we've looked at the central midfielders here. So let's move on to the central midfielders. And we have as a, back in 2022, we had as a definite candidate Idrissa Gueye. And we had likely candidates Cheick Kouyaté and Pape Matar Sarr. We had a possible candidate in Mustafa Name, and possible but unlikely candidate Joseph Lopi, and new candidate here we'll put Pathé Cisse there. So let's look and see how it turned out for these candidates. Idrissa Gueye was selected for the Cup, but we're going to actually move him to the attacking midfield position here and talk about him there. So we'll leave him as a definite candidate here, but catch up with him later. Cheick Kouyaté was selected for the squad. He started game 1, but was subbed out 74 minutes in due to an injury, which actually ended his tournament. So that was the World Cup. He has since started 3 of their 13 games, subbed in for 3 and on the bench for 3. And as we saw, injured for 3 Cup games. Just 1 game that he actually wasn't selected for. So we still have him as a likely candidate for this Cup. Next we have Pape Matar Sarr, or Pape Sarr, and he was selected for the Cup also, but as a substitute, just subbed into 2 of the 4 games there, and has since started 6 of their 13 games, subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 2. So 3 matches that he wasn't selected for. So we keep Pape Sarr as a likely candidate for this Cup. Next we had Mustafa Name at the possible level, and he was selected for the squad actually on the roster, but saw no action on the field there. However, he has not returned since the 2022 World Cup, and so we have to move him from possible to seemingly off the squad there. And finally, Joseph Lopi. Well, he was unlikely to reach the Cup, and he did not make the squad for the 2022 World Cup, and in fact has not been selected for the team since the 2021 African Cup. So we're going to remove him from the list altogether. We do have a name to add to the list here, and that is Lamine Camara at the possible level. Lamine Camara was with the African Nations Championship squad in January 2023, but he was brought up to the senior squad in September of 2023, and earned a cap with them there, and was on the bench in October 2023 there. So one substitute appearance, one start, and one bench appearance up until November 2023. And he's also kind of moved up a little bit in his club. He was with Generation Foot in Senegal and has since moved to Metz in France. He's only 19 years old, so Lamine Camara, a possible candidate for this tournament, and perhaps a name for the future. Okay, so now that we've done central midfielders, we can summarize both. We have a lot of names here, so we'll just go over them. For defensive midfielders, likely candidate Nampalys Mendy, possible candidate Papa Gueye, and we'll leave it at that. And for central midfield, Idrissa Gueye, although we're moving him to the attacking midfield position. Cheikhou Kouyaté and Pape Sarr at the likely level, and Lamine Camara, a newcomer, at the possible level. Those are really the candidates we're looking at. And over the past year, it was Nampalys Mendy and Pathé Cissé as the main players in the Cup. A variety of players after the Cup. Idrissa Gueye sometimes playing in central midfield, but usually further upfield. Papa Gueye, Cheikhou Kouyaté, and Pape Sarr, all seeing more than one start there. And really, it hasn't resolved into a clear picture yet. So, especially with a couple of injury concerns or fitness concerns, we really kind of have to see what it looks like in the Cup. And we're not bold enough to predict a starter in the central midfield. But again, we'll come back to Idrissa Gueye when we look at attacking midfielders. Okay, next we look at left midfielders. We find that most teams don't have players coded as left or right midfielders. We are going to look at one, but I'll talk about the position here. Left midfield, along with right midfield, does exist actually in Senegal's formations, because they've played a 4-3-3 several times in the middle of the period here, in the middle of 2023. On the left, it was covered by defensive or central midfielders that we have just looked at. On the right, though, we do have a player coded as a right midfielder, and he does play in the position. But when the position doesn't exist, he turns into a right winger or a right attacking midfield. And we'll get to him in a moment. We'll just look at the situation back in 2022 World Cup. We did not have any players coded as left midfielders back then, and we did have this player as a right midfielder coded as injured. Crépin Diatta is the player. Hope I didn't hold you in suspense for too long there. Crépin Diatta coded as a right midfielder, and however, yes, he was an injury concern going into the Cup. However, he was selected for the Cup and actually started 3 of the 4 games there. And since he has started 7 of their 13 games, and he's subbed in for 4 and been on the bench for 1. So just one match that he hasn't been selected for. And so we move him up to the definite level. We think he will definitely be selected. So that is Crépin Diatta, the right midfielder. Again, either playing in that position if it's a 4-3-3, or as a right winger or right attacking midfielder. Okay, and now we do move to the upper part of the field, and we look at the upper left quadrant, left winger / left attacking midfielder position. And here we had, in 2022, a definite candidate in Sadio Mane, and a possible candidate in Keita Balde. And that is it. We did have a player who was seemingly off the squad and proved to be. So obviously it doesn't seem, or it seems like we didn't know about Sadio Mane's injury when we did part 1 of the Cup, and of course that was a tremendous loss to them. Sadio Mane is back though, so not selected for the Cup due to an injury. And in terms of his club situation, he, of course, moved from Liverpool to Bayern Munich in 2022, but actually didn't do that well with Bayern Munich and has since moved to Al Nasser in Saudi Arabia. So I think that's the third or fourth player we've seen move from a fairly big European club to a club in Saudi Arabia. So Sadio Mane returned from his injury absence in March 2023 and started 8 of their remaining 9 games and was not selected for one other. So I'm sure he'll be anxious to play in this Cup, and we have Sadio Mane as a definite candidate here. The next one, Keita Balde, was not selected for the World Cup. We had him at the possible level, and he has actually not appeared for the national team since June 2022. So Keita Balde we're removed from the list. But we do have a player to add to the list, and that is newcomer Papa Ousmane Sako. However, he's only at the possible but unlikely level. So he was selected for 4 matches in a row and then not selected for the last 5 games. So we'll maybe give more information on him if he's selected for the final squad. But it looks like we just have the one candidate over here, Sadio Mane, and we will be brave and predict that he's going to be a starter. All right, over to the right wing. We begin with Ismaila Sarr. And he was a definite candidate back for the 2022 World Cup. We had then all the way down to 2 possible but unlikely candidates, and I will just name one of them, Abdallah Sima, because we will talk about him briefly. And we also had a new candidate here in Nicholas Jackson, who we learned about in part 2 when we did part 2 after the rosters came out. So Ismaila Sarr was a starter in the 2022 World Cup, started all 4 games, and has since started 8 of their 13 games since the Cup, and was on the bench for 1, injured for 2, and not selected for 2. Nevertheless, we think he is a definite candidate, and so we keep him at that level for this Cup. And the other one, possible but unlikely, Abdallah Sima, was not selected for the Cup, but he has appeared since, a single appearance in October 2023. But not selected for either of the November games. So we keep him at the possible but unlikely level, Abdallah Sima. And let's take a look at Nicholas Jackson. He was selected for the Cup, so we change his name from grey to black now that he has tournament experience. And we move him here up to a possible level. So he has also had a significant club change, moving from Villarreal in Spain to Chelsea in England. However, after the Cup, he did actually appear shortly before the World Cup in September 2022. And well, for whatever reason, we didn't have him on the list in part 1 of our media cast. But since the World Cup, he has started 2 of their 13 games there, subbed in for 4 and on the bench for 5. So fairly regularly selected, but not selected for a couple of matches there, and actually not performing that well with Chelsea in England. So we have him at the possible level of selection here. And if he is selected, he probably won't be a starter. All right, well, we have no new names to add to the list here. And so we just finished by summarizing the position. So actually, Krépin Diatta, the player we met as a right midfielder, was the right winger in the cup. Ismail Assar, for his part, basically covered Sadio Mane's position on the left. So attacking midfielder Ilman Ndiaye also played in this position. We'll meet him soon. And Ndiaye continued actually as right winger after the cup, with Sarr and even right back Sabali also used in the right winger or right attacking midfield position. So the position does seem to be primarily Ismail Assar, but attacking midfielder Ilman and Ndiaye putting in a bit of a challenge for the position. So we are going to leave that for the spotlight review, because we'll probably move Ilman and Ndiaye over to this position. And okay, and I think I didn't summarize the left wing position. So, but as we just learned, Ismail Assar covered the left wing position. Actually, he and Crepin Diallo did switch sides once during the cup, and on the left wing we saw that Sadio Mane has come back into the position since his recovery from injury, and almost exclusively has been the left winger. Okay, that is the midfield, and so we move on to the forwards, beginning with attacking midfield. And the candidates back in 2022 were just one possible candidate, Ilman Ndiaye, who we've just mentioned. Yes, so Ilman Ndiaye was possible. He was selected for the cup, and he was a substitute at first, but he gained a starting position for games 3 and 4, lining up as a right attacking midfielder in one of the games and a central attacking midfielder in the other. Since the World Cup, he has started 7 of their 13 games, subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 1, and not selected for 3 matches. And he's had a bit of a jump in his career, club career, moving from Sheffield United, who he was with from 2019 to 2023, actually loaned during that period to a fairly low club, Hyde United in England in 2020. But in 2023, he moved to Marseille in France, which I think we could argue is a step up. His position seems a little unclear, though, because one of my main sources has him as a forward, and as we've seen, he's played more as a right winger. So we're going to move him to right wing here. And he remains, or he's gone up from being a possible candidate to being a likely candidate. We're also going to change his name to Black because he's been through a tournament, but we're going to put him over as a likely candidate for the right wing. In terms of attacking midfielders, I said we would be adding Idrissa Gueye as a definite candidate, not necessarily as an attacking midfielder, because he does still play in the central midfield. He too has undergone a club change. He's moved from Paris Saint-Germain in France to Everton in England in 2022. And he has since become a centurion with 102 caps for Senegal. So he was a starter in the World Cup. At least in 3 of the games. He was suspended on yellows for game 4. And here we have him also as an attacking midfielder in 2 of his starts, and as a right midfielder in 1 of them. So a pretty versatile player. Since the World Cup, he has started 8 of their 13 games, subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 2. Another suspension, or maybe that was the one, game 4 of the World Cup, his suspension, and just 1 match that he wasn't selected for. So we're not dead sure what his position is going to be. He does seem to be the central attacking midfielder when they play the 4-2-3-1 formation, but also pops up in other areas too. So attacking midfielder Idrissa Gueye. And I think we've covered it. so I won't read the summary. Instead, we'll move on to the forward line. Back in 2022, we had Famara Diédhiou as a definite candidate, and we had two possible candidates, Habib Diallo and Bamba Dieng. And then a couple of players who seem to be off the squad, and I won't add them because I don't think they've come back into contention. And we had one player who we coded as injured, and that was Boulaye Dia. Boulaye Dia. And so let's see what became of these players. Our definite candidate, Famara Diédhiou, was selected for the squad, but he wasn't the starter. I think we thought he would be the starter, but he started game 2 and otherwise just subbed into one game. However, Famara Diédhiou has not appeared since the 2022 World Cup, so we have to move him all the way from definite down to seemingly off the squad going into this cup. Next, we have Habib Diallo. We had him as a possible candidate. He was not selected for the cup, but he has been active since. He returned after a 9-month absence in March 2023 and started 3 of their remaining 9 games, as well as subbing in for 4 and being on the bench for 1. So not selected for 1 match. So has really come in, come back quite strongly, Habib Diallo. And we move him up from possible to likely. And just a note on his club, it actually seems a bit of a step down here from Strasbourg in France in 2023. He also moved to Saudi Arabia. So we have almost a community of Middle Eastern Senegalese players forming, and that was in 2023. Nevertheless, despite being not selected for the Cup, he was fielded in 7 of the last 9 games. So, again, Habib Diallo, a likely candidate. Bamba Dieng we had as a possible candidate, and he remains a possible candidate. He was selected for the Cup. He subbed into all 4 games there. However, since the World Cup, he hasn't started any of their 13 games, but he was subbed in for 5, though 4 of those were the World Cup matches, and has been on the bench for 1 match. He was injured for 4 and not selected for 3, so he kind of barely makes the possible level here. But we don't quite think he's unlikely, Bamba Dieng. And he also has had a club move, I'd say a small step down from Marseille in France to Lorient in France. And Bamba Dieng remains a possible candidate. Yeah, his injury is also a bit of a concern there, so we might have to update that in part 2. Finally, we look at the candidate who we had listed as injured, and it was Boulaye Dia, and he was selected for the Cup. In fact, he was a starter in all 4 games there. And since the World Cup, he has started 6 of their 13 games, subbed in for 1, on the bench for 1, and out with 2 separate injuries for 3 of the last 5 games, and not selected for 2 others. He's also taken a step down in his club status. He was with Villarreal in Spain, Boulaye Dia, but has moved to Salernitana in Italy in 2023. So injuries playing a role there, maybe a step down in club affiliation. We now have Boulaye Dia as a possible candidate, despite being a starter in the previous Cup. Oops, hang on, I'm getting a bit lost in my graphics here. So let's summarize the forward position first by going through our new list. So now we have no definite candidate, a likely candidate in Habib Diallo, two possible candidates in Bamba Dieng and Boulaye Dia, and that is all we have. Uh, and we have no new candidates to add to the list. So let's summarize the position. Again, it was Boulaye Dia in the cup. And in one game, they had a two-man forward line, and it was Ditu who started alongside Dia. And Dia continued for two games after the cup, but then a lot of experimentation began. So several players were tried out in the centre forward position, some of them out of position players. However, it was Habib Diallo who started more than anyone else, although that was only 3 times. Attacking midfielder Ilman Ndiaye was tried in the last game, but all in all, it still seems quite unsettled as to who the starter will be. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of our look at the candidates. And for a bit of fun, we'll end with our spotlight review and try to predict who we think is going to be starting. And we begin with manager Aliou Cisse. We do think he will be retained through the cup. So we're going to call him a definite candidate. Goalkeeper Edward Mendy. We were a bit gun shy there with him missing 5 games, but we do think there's a strong chance that he will be the starter since he came back in at the end. And central defense, of course, there should be 2, maybe even 3 defenders, but Kalidou Koulibaly, we think will be one of the starters, and we have basically 4 likely candidates alongside of him, but we're not willing to kind of put our bet on which one it will be. Moving over to left backs, we think Ismail Jacobs has secured the spot for himself. There's really no other viable candidates there. On the other side, Youssouf Sabaly, however, he's a fitness concern. So if he is out, there's not a lot of candidates. We actually think it'll either be someone coming in out of position, or perhaps Bouna Sarr, if he's invited back into the squad or comes back into the squad, would be a good person to have. So Youssouf Sabaly with an asterisk. In the central midfield, we feel a lot of confusion among the many candidates there. We don't see any of them starting enough for us to nominate as a starter. If I had to say, I'd probably say Pathé Ciss would be the most likely candidate, but we're not willing to commit that to paper, so we're going to leave that one blank. Left midfield, actually, there are no candidates, but on the right midfield, we have Crépin Diala. So almost like a bit of a versatile midfielder, because they don't always have that position. So we do see him maybe popping up on the right wing, although we'll see that's a fairly busy position. On the left wing, though, no doubt about it, Sadio Mane, we think will be the starter there. On the right wing, we do favor Ismaila Sarr, but we do have a couple of other candidates kind of vying for the position. One is Ilman Ndiaye, and the other is Crépin Diata. So he has a bit of competition over there. So we have put Ismaila Sarr and Ilman Ndiaye kind of in blue, thinking that it could be one of the two, or a rotation between the two, which is perhaps even a bit more possible. Central attacking midfield, we moved actually central midfielder Idrissa Gueye up. They don't always have this position. We think he'll be on the field, and if they do have that position, it'll be Idrissa Gueye. In the forward position, we maybe should have said that we think the right winger, or the player coded as a right winger, Nicholas Jackson, we should have moved to among the forwards. However, we don't think he's going to be a starter. And the only other possible candidate is Habib Diallo, but we're not confident enough to say either of those or any of the other forwards we looked at will be. So we wouldn't be surprised if it was something like Sadio Mane playing out of position as the forward, and then one of those candidates we mentioned as right wingers kind of moving over to his position, something like that. Okay, that is it. That's the Spotlight review, and we're not betting big money on our guesses there, but I think we'll get a few of them right. Okay, let's finish with a preview of part 2. So in part 2, we're going to go through the list that we created here and say which ones made it and which ones didn't, and especially focusing on any surprises of players who we thought were going to make it but didn't, or who we didn't have on our list today but are added there. So there's always a few surprises. We'll also give an update on injuries, and there are a few to talk about here. Yusuf Sabali and a couple of others. So when we get closer to the Cup, we should be able to give a bit more of a clear idea. Okay, that brings us to the end of part 1. We hope you tune in for part 2, probably in early January. We originally planned to tag on our past, present and future plans for the mediacast, but we have instead decided to put a link to that 10-minute video in the show notes. It covers what we're working on and what we plan to do over the next 9 months. We would like to thank Pixabay and Alexei Ivanov of Mappa Music for the wonderful background music accompanying this mediacast.